They say Isaiah Carter was a quiet man, strong hands, steady heart, and a temper chained tighter than the iron he forged. On the barren plantation, he worked, obeyed, and dreamed only of one thing: keeping his wife Mary and their 2 children safe. But when the master, Samuel Barron, sold their little boy out of spite, something inside Isaiah broke. That night, under the cover of thunder and darkness, he did the unthinkable, raised his hammer, and ended his master's reign in a single, shattering blow. By morning, the river carried more than blood. It carried whispers. Whispers that the master's brother, Edmund, had returned, calm, cruel, and hell-bent on finding who dared defy the barren name. Now hunted through the swamps, Isaiah fights not just for freedom, but for the soul of his family and his own. He wasn't born a killer, but in a land where mercy was a crime, a man had to choose between his chains or his children, and Isaiah chose fire. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Mississippi Delta awakened beneath a copper sun. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple as darkness retreated from the endless cotton fields. The plants stood in perfect rows, their white bowls like tiny clouds anchored to the earth. In this early light, before the crushing heat descended, there was an eerie beauty to the plantation that belied its true nature. Isaiah Carter watched that sunrise with eyes that had witnessed 35 such summers. His broad shoulders, muscled from years at the forge, already glistened with sweat as he moved through the field, checking the other workers' progress before Overseer Briggs made his rounds. Isaiah's movements were measured and deliberate, conserving energy for the long day ahead. "Morning comin' too quick these days," muttered old Jacob beside him, his fingers twisted with arthritis as he plucked cotton bolls and dropped them in his sack. Isaiah nodded, but said nothing. Words were dangerous things on barren plantation. Even whispers had a way of traveling to the wrong ears. From his position at the field's edge, Isaiah could see the cooking sheds where Mary worked. His wife moved with quiet efficiency, her strong hands preparing breakfast for the big house. Even from this distance, he could sense the grace in her movements, the same grace that had captured his heart 15 years ago. Near her, Joseph and Lydia darted between the rows, gathering scraps of cotton that had fallen to the ground. Joseph, tall for 10 years, worked with a serious face that mirrored his father's. Little Lydia hummed softly as she worked, her 7-year-old fingers quick and nimble. "Carter!" The sharp voice of Tom Briggs cut through the morning calm. The overseer approached on horseback, his whip already in hand, though the day had barely begun. "Master wants them plows fixed by noon. Get to the forge, after you check this field." "Yes, sir," Isaiah replied, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. He kept his eyes lowered, a mask of submission that had become second nature. The blacksmith's shed was Isaiah's kingdom, the one place on the plantation where his skill commanded respect. Master Samuel Barron might own his body, but in the forge, Isaiah's hands created what no other man on the plantation could. He shaped metal to his will, transforming raw iron into tools, hardware, and sometimes, secretly, small trinkets he could sell in town when sent on errands. Inside the dim shed, with its familiar smells of coal and hot metal, Isaiah retrieved a small pouch hidden beneath a loose floorboard. He counted the coins quickly. $12.83. Not enough. Not nearly enough, but it was growing. 2 more years, he whispered to himself. 2 more years of saving every penny, of extra work, of careful planning. 2 more years until he could approach Master Barron with enough money to buy freedom for his family. The law allowed it, though many masters refused. Isaiah had seen it happen once before on a neighboring plantation, a man purchasing himself and his wife. It was possible. The morning progressed with the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal. Isaiah's muscles worked from memory as his mind drifted to his children. Joseph showed promise at the forge, watching his father with keen, intelligent eyes. Isaiah taught him small lessons when no one was looking: how to judge the heat of metal by its color, how to hold the hammer to save strength. Lydia had Mary's gentle spirit, singing little songs that lightened even the darkest days. By midday, the sun had climbed high, beating down mercilessly. Isaiah wiped sweat from his brow with a rag as commotion arose from the main field. Master Samuel Barron had arrived on horseback for inspection, his cream-colored suit pristine despite the heat. Beside him rode his brother Edmund, visiting from New Orleans. Isaiah set his hammer down and stepped outside. Samuel Barron was shouting, his face flushed with anger. Old Jacob lay in the dirt, cotton scattered around him. "Get up, you lazy dog!" Barron yelled, dismounting. "Edmund, this is what happens when you show too much kindness. They take advantage." Isaiah could see Jacob struggling to rise, his old legs betraying him. The man had collapsed from heat, not laziness. Isaiah knew the signs, had seen men die in these fields when their bodies simply gave out. "Carter!" Barron called, spotting him. "Come here." Isaiah approached, his face carefully blank. Barron thrust the whip into his hands. 10 lashes. Teach him about dropping my cotton." The field fell silent. Isaiah held the whip, feeling its weight like a serpent in his hands. "Master," he said quietly, "old Jacob's been picking cotton for 30 years. Never been lazy a day in his life. The heat just got him, sir." Barron's face darkened. "Are you refusing me, boy?" Isaiah looked at Jacob, then at the other slaves watching. In the distance, he saw Mary at the edge of the cooking shed, her hand over her mouth. Joseph and Lydia had stopped working, their small faces turned toward the scene. "I can't do this, sir," Isaiah said, holding the whip back out to Barron. For one terrible moment, silence hung in the air. Then Samuel Barron's face transformed with rage. He snatched the whip and brought it down across Isaiah's chest. The crack echoed across the field. "You dare defy me!" Another lash fell. "On my own land?" And another. Isaiah remained standing, blood seeping through his torn shirt. He didn't flinch, didn't cry out. Each lash was another coin in his mind, another day toward freedom. When Barron finally tired, he leaned close to Isaiah's face. "Your boy Joseph looks strong. Field hands are bringing good prices in Louisiana. Perhaps it's time I separated your little family." Morning came with the smell of rain-soaked earth. The storm that had rumbled through the night left puddles across the plantation grounds and a heavy mist that clung to the cotton fields. Isaiah rose before dawn, his chest still burning from yesterday's lashes. He'd barely slept, the pain and Barron's threat keeping his mind racing through the dark hours. Mary had dressed his wounds with a paste of herbs, her gentle fingers working in silence. They both understood what Samuel Barron's words meant. The threat to sell Joseph wasn't idle talk. It was the cruelest weapon masters wielded against those who defied them. "We just need to keep our heads down for a while," Mary had whispered as she applied the medicine. "Master Samuel gets these moods. They pass." Isaiah wanted to believe her, but something in Barron's eyes yesterday had been different. There was a coldness there, a calculation that went beyond his usual cruelty. Now, as the plantation stirred to life, Isaiah made his way to the communal breakfast area. A large pot of cornmeal mush steamed in the center of the clearing where the enslaved gathered before work. The children always lined up first, holding their wooden bowls. Isaiah scanned the small faces, looking for Joseph's serious expression and Lydia's bright eyes. Lydia stood in line, shifting from foot to foot as she waited her turn. But Joseph wasn't beside her. "Lydia!" Isaiah called. approaching his daughter. "Where's your brother?" The little girl looked up, confusion crossing her face. "I thought he was with you, Papa. He wasn't in bed when I woke up." A cold weight settled in Isaiah's stomach. He looked toward Mary, who was helping serve the meal. Their eyes met across the clearing, and he saw his own fear reflected in her gaze. "Mary," he said as he reached her. "Joseph's not here." Before she could respond, a commotion rose from the direction of the main house. Slaves were gathering, drawn by raised voices and the sound of Overseer Briggs shouting orders. Through the crowd, Isaiah could see Master Barron standing on the front porch of the Grand White House, gesturing emphatically. "Stay here," Isaiah told Mary, but she was already moving, following him as they pushed through the crowd. They reached the edge of the gathering just as Samuel Barron's voice cut through the murmuring. "This is what happens when you forget your place," he shouted, his face flushed with either drink or anger. "When one of you thinks he's better than his station, you all suffer the consequences." Standing beside him was Overseer Briggs, holding Joseph by the arm. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, darting through the crowd until they found his parents. "Papa!" he called out, his voice breaking. Isaiah surged forward, but was caught by two other slaves who held him back, whispering urgently, "Don't make it worse!" "As you can all see," Barron continued, "I've decided young Joseph here needs a different environment, one where he won't learn disrespect from his father." Mary pushed through to the front. "Master Barron, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "He's just a child. He ain't done nothing wrong." Samuel Barron looked down at her, his expression hardening. "The boy has been sold to the Turner Plantation. The papers were signed last night." "This isn't a discussion, Mary." Isaiah broke free from the restraining hands. "Master, I beg you," he said, his voice low and desperate. "Punish me however you want, but don't take my son." For a moment, something flickered across Barron's face, perhaps the faintest shadow of doubt. Then it hardened again. "Mr. Turner's overseer will be here at noon to collect him," Barron said flatly. "Get back to work, all of you." He turned and walked back into the house. Briggs shoved Joseph toward another slave who would prepare him for the journey. "Papa!" Joseph cried out again, tears streaming down his face. Isaiah moved toward his son, but Briggs stepped between them, hand on his whip. "Don't try it, Carter," he warned. "Master's been more than clear." Mary collapsed to her knees in the mud, a wail of grief rising from her throat that seemed to echo across the entire plantation. Isaiah knelt beside her, gathering her shaking body into his arms, his own tears falling silently. Around them, the other slaves dispersed quietly, heads bowed. This was the reality they all lived with, that at any moment, for any reason, or no reason at all, their families could be torn apart. Children were inventory, entries in a ledger, investments to be liquidated when convenient. Isaiah helped Mary back to their cabin. Lydia followed, confused and frightened by what she'd witnessed. They had until noon, just a few hours with their son before he was taken away. The day passed in a blur of grief. Joseph was kept separate from them until just before the Turner overseer arrived. They were granted 5 minutes to say goodbye. "Be strong," Isaiah told his son, holding him tightly. "Remember everything I taught you. We'll find you." "Promise?" Joseph asked, his voice small. "I promise," Isaiah said, knowing it was a vow he might never be able to keep. That night, after Mary and Lydia had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Isaiah slipped out of their cabin. The plantation was quiet, most of the slaves too tired to do anything but collapse after the day's labor. Only the occasional cry of a night bird broke the silence. Isaiah moved like a shadow toward the big house. He had no plan beyond begging, offering anything, everything, to bring his son back. Perhaps Samuel Barron could still be reasoned with. Perhaps there was some shred of humanity that could be appealed to. He approached from the kitchen side, knowing the house slaves would be finished with their duties by now. A light still burned in Samuel's study. Through the partially open window, Isaiah could hear voices, Samuel Barron and Overseer Briggs. "The Turner payment helps, but it's not enough," Samuel was saying, his words slightly slurred with drink. "Markham wants his money by December, or he'll take legal action." "What about the other Carter children?" Briggs asked. "The girl would fetch a decent price." "One child from a family brings sadness," Samuel replied. "Taking all of them brings despair. Despair makes them stop working effectively." Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest as he pressed closer to hear. "Split them up," Samuel continued. "I've already written to Brooks in New Orleans. He's looking for a cook. Mary will go there. The blacksmith has skills. He'll bring the highest price at the Natchez market. The girl can go to the Wilsons upriver. By winter, we'll have enough to cover the debts. And then some," Briggs chuckled. "The way you play cards, we might need to sell off more next year." Isaiah backed away from the window, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. It wasn't just Joseph. They were going to sell all of them, tear his family apart completely. He ran back to the slave quarters, his mind racing with terror and rage. When he reached their cabin, he burst through the door, waking Mary with his entrance. "Isaiah!" "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up quickly. He dropped to his knees beside their pallet, taking her hands in his trembling ones. "We have to leave," he whispered urgently. "Tonight, before sunrise." "Leave?" Mary's voice was barely audible. "You mean run?" Isaiah nodded, his eyes wild in the dim light. "I heard them talking. Samuel's selling all of us. You to New Orleans, me to Natchez, Lydia upriver. He's splitting us up before winter." Mary's face drained of color. "But Isaiah, if we run and they catch us—" "I know," he said. The penalty for attempted escape was brutal. Whipping, mutilation, or death, depending on the master's mood. The tiny candle that lit their cabin flickered, casting desperate shadows across their faces. As if punctuating their hopeless situation, the flame sputtered and died, plunging them into darkness. In the sudden black, Mary's hand found Isaiah's cheek. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice breaking. Midnight draped itself over barren plantation like a heavy blanket. The slave quarters stood silent except for the steady chirp of crickets and the occasional soft snore from exhausted bodies. A half-moon hung in the sky, casting just enough light to navigate the packed dirt paths between cabins. Isaiah lay awake beside Mary, watching her troubled sleep. Lydia curled against her mother's back, small hands clutching Mary's nightdress. After their whispered conversation, Mary had fallen into an uneasy slumber. But Isaiah couldn't close his eyes. The overseer's words echoed in his mind. Mary to New Orleans, the blacksmith to Natchez, the girl upriver. He rose silently, careful not to disturb them. From beneath their thin mattress, he pulled out a small leather satchel he used for his blacksmithing tools. Inside was his hammer, not the large sledge from the forge, but a smaller one he used for detailed work. The wooden handle was smooth from years of use, the metal head heavy and solid. Isaiah wasn't sure why he took it. For protection, perhaps. Or maybe because holding something familiar steadied his trembling hands. He slipped out of the cabin and stood in the darkness, letting his eyes adjust. The big house loomed in the distance, its white columns ghostly in the moonlight. A single window glowed yellow. Samuel's study. The master often drank late into the night, especially after selling slaves. Isaiah moved along the edge of the quarters, keeping to the shadows. He needed to think, to plan. They couldn't just run blindly. They needed supplies, direction, some kind of advantage. As he reached the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged from the direction of the big house. Even in the dim light, Isaiah recognized the unsteady gait of Master Samuel Barron. The man staggered slightly, clearly drunk, but moving with purpose toward the slave quarters. Isaiah pressed himself against the wall of the tool shed, watching. Samuel rarely came to the quarters at night unless cold fear gripped Isaiah's heart as Samuel turned directly toward his cabin, toward Mary and Lydia. The master had threatened to destroy everything Isaiah loved. Was this how he planned to start? Without conscious thought, Isaiah moved. He cut across the clearing, intercepting Samuel just as the man reached the cabin door. "Master Baron," Isaiah said quietly, stepping into his path. Samuel startled, then squinted in the darkness. "Carter," he slurred. "Get out of my way. I'm inspecting my property." "Sir, everyone's asleep," Isaiah said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Perhaps in the morning. Are you telling me what to do?" Samuel's voice rose dangerously. "On my own plantation?" He jabbed a finger into Isaiah's chest. "Your wife's in there, isn't she? Maybe I should remind her who owns her, who owns all of you." Isaiah stood his ground. "Please, master." "She's not well." Samuel laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the night. "Not well? That's not what I heard. I heard she's quite accommodating." He tried to push past Isaiah. "Now move, before I have you whipped again." Isaiah's hand closed around Samuel's arm, stopping him. It was a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. A slave laying hands on his master. Samuel's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with rage. "You dare touch me!" He swung wildly, his fist connecting with Isaiah's jaw. Isaiah staggered but didn't fall. Behind him, he heard the cabin door creak open. Mary stood in the doorway, horror dawning on her face as she took in the scene. "Isaiah, no," she whispered. Samuel saw her and smiled cruelly. "There she is. Tell your husband to step aside, Mary, or you'll both regret it." "Please, Master Baron," Mary begged. "Just leave us be." "Leave you be?" Samuel laughed again. "You don't give orders here." He shoved Isaiah hard, sending him stumbling back toward the satchel he'd dropped. "When I'm done with her, I'll sell your daughter next. Break up what's left of your family piece by piece." Something snapped inside Isaiah. The years of suppressed rage, the grief of losing Joseph, the terror of losing Mary and Lydia. It all surged through him in a blinding wave. His hand found the satchel, closed around the hammer's handle. Samuel lunged for Mary. Isaiah swung. The sound was sickening, a dull crack as metal met bone. Samuel Barron froze, a look of surprise crossing his face. Then he crumpled to the ground, blood pooling black in the moonlight beneath his head. For a long moment, no one moved. Isaiah stared at the hammer in his hand, then at the still form of his master. Mary pressed her hands to her mouth, stifling a scream. "Is he?" she finally whispered. Isaiah knelt and pressed trembling fingers to Samuel's neck. No pulse. The blank eyes stared up at the stars, unseeing. "Mary," Isaiah said, his voice strange and distant to his own ears. "Get Lydia. Now!" Mary disappeared into the cabin as Isaiah grasped Samuel under the arms. He dragged the body away from their cabin, leaving a dark smear on the dirt. His mind raced frantically. Someone would come looking for the master soon. The house slaves would notice his absence at breakfast. They had hours at most. Behind the stables, a stack of cotton bales sat under a heavy tarp, waiting to be loaded for transport. Isaiah heaved the body underneath, covering it with the tarp and piling loose cotton over the bloodstains. His hands shook violently as he wiped them on his shirt. When he returned, Mary stood outside with Lydia held tightly against her side. The child was groggy with sleep, confused by the midnight awakening. "What's happening, Papa?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Isaiah knelt before his daughter. "We have to go away, Lydia. Right now. Is it because of Joseph? Are we going to find him?" Isaiah exchanged glances with Mary. "Yes," he said. "We're going to try." He turned to Mary, speaking quickly and quietly. "Take Lydia to the riverbank. Abel, the old fisherman, has a boat hidden in the reeds. Tell him Isaiah sent you. He'll guide you to the swamp trails. What about you? Mary clutched his arm. We have to stay together. I'll join you before dawn. I need to get our papers from the forge, the ones I've been working on. Isaiah had spent months forging travel documents, a dangerous secret he'd kept even from Mary. Isaiah, Mary's eyes filled with tears. What you did, it was him or us, Isaiah said, his voice hardening. Go now. Don't look back. He watched as Mary led Lydia away, their figures growing smaller as they moved toward the river. The fog that rose from the water's edge gradually swallowed them, until Isaiah stood alone in the night. He turned toward the big house. He needed those papers if they had any chance of passing for free travelers. The forge stood dark and silent, the documents hidden beneath a loose brick in the back wall. As he approached, a sound made him freeze. The creak of wheels, the jingle of harness. A carriage was coming up the main drive. At this hour? Isaiah melted into the shadows of an oak tree, watching as the carriage pulled up to the front of the house. A lantern swung from its side, casting moving patterns of light across the gravel. The carriage door opened. A man stepped out, straightening his fine coat. Even from a distance, Isaiah recognized him. Edmund Barron, Samuel's younger brother from New Orleans. Edmund looked around the darkened house with obvious annoyance. "Hello?" he called out. "Samuel, where is everyone?" Isaiah pressed himself against the tree trunk, heart hammering in his chest. Edmund wasn't expected for weeks. Why was he here now? And worse, when Isaiah glanced back toward the stables, he realized with mounting horror that something was wrong. The tarp covering Samuel's body had been moved. Someone had found it and moved it elsewhere. Morning came too quickly. Golden light spilled across the fields, touching the smokehouse where Isaiah had hidden since before dawn. He'd spent the night in terrified motion, first checking the stables to confirm Samuel's body was indeed gone, then searching desperately for his forged papers in the forge, only to find them missing as well. Someone had been there before him. Now he crouched behind stacked wood, watching the commotion unfold at the big house. House slaves scurried across the porch, while Edmund Barron stood on the front steps, his posture rigid with irritation. "This is unacceptable," Edmund's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "My brother knew I was arriving. Where is he?" Tom Briggs, the overseer, pulled his hat from his head in a gesture of nervous respect. "We're searching, sir. Master Samuel sometimes rides out early." "Without greeting his brother? Without leaving word?" Edmund's voice lacked the slur of his brother's, each word precisely placed. "Check the fields, the road to town. Perhaps he had an accident." Isaiah's stomach twisted. Samuel Barron had certainly had an accident at the end of Isaiah's hammer. He pressed deeper into the shadows as slaves and workers fanned out across the property. The search continued through the morning. Isaiah remained hidden, watching field hands being pulled from their work to join the growing hunt. He knew he should run, find Mary and Lydia at the river, but leaving now would draw attention. Better to blend in, to be one more confused face in the crowd. Just before noon, the shout came from the direction of the river. "Here, down by the bend." Isaiah joined the rush of people, keeping his head down. If he acted normal, perhaps no one would remember he had any reason to be afraid. The crowd gathered on the riverbank. In the shallow water near the shore, caught in tangled roots, floated the body of Samuel Barron. His fine clothes were sodden and muddy, but it was his face that drew gasps of horror. Fish and turtles had been at work overnight. The features were mangled, barely recognizable. "Lord have mercy," someone whispered. Edmund Barron pushed through the crowd, his face going pale at the sight. For a moment, his composed demeanor cracked. Then, like shutters closing, his expression hardened. "Get him out," he ordered. "Bring him to the house." As workers waded into the water to retrieve the body, Edmund turned to Briggs. "Who did this? Was it robbery?" Briggs shook his head. "His pocket watch is still there, sir. And his ring." Edmund's eyes swept over the gathered slaves, lingering on each face. Then it was revenge. Someone here hated my brother enough to kill him. His voice dropped lower. I want every man questioned, every cabin searched. Isaiah felt sweat trickle down his back despite the mild morning. The river had washed away any signs of the hammer blow, leaving only the damage from nature's scavengers. But questions would come. Someone might have seen him last night. Someone might remember his confrontation with Samuel the day before. Throughout the afternoon, Edmund and Briggs interrogated the enslaved men one by one in the barn. Isaiah waited his turn, rehearsing lies in his mind. When finally he stood before Edmund Barron, he kept his eyes appropriately lowered. "Your name?" Edmund asked, consulting a ledger. "Isaiah Carter, sir." "The blacksmith." Edmund studied him. "My brother mentioned you in his letters. Said you were skilled with metal." Isaiah nodded silently, heart pounding. "Where were you last night?" "In my cabin, sir, with my wife and daughter." "All night?" Isaiah hesitated just a fraction too long. "Yes, sir." Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly. Unlike his brother's drunken rages, Edmund's scrutiny was coldly rational, more dangerous because it missed nothing. "Your son was sold yesterday," Edmund noted, glancing at the ledger. "You must have been upset." "It's not my place to be upset, Master Baron," Isaiah replied, the practiced words tasting like ash. Edmund watched him for a long moment, then dismissed him with a wave. "We'll speak again, Carter." As Isaiah walked away, his legs felt weak with relief. But Edmund's final words echoed like a promise or a threat. Night fell over the plantation. Lanterns blazed in the big house as Edmund conducted his business. Guards patrolled the grounds, watching for any sign of uprising or escape. In the slave quarters, people spoke in whispers, doors shut tight against listening ears. Isaiah sat on his bed, staring at the empty space where Joseph had slept, the empty corner where Mary and Lydia should be preparing for bed. He prayed they had found Abel, that they were safely hidden in the swamp. His entire plan had unraveled. Now he needed to reach them without being caught. A soft knock at the door startled him. Isaiah opened it to find old Ruth, her weathered face grave in the darkness. "May I come in, brother?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Isaiah stepped aside. Ruth had been on the plantation longer than anyone remembered. She collected herbs, tended the sick, and knew secrets most didn't. "They'll come for you before dawn," she said, without preamble. "Briggs is bringing dogs from the Wilkerson plantation. Edmund Barron is offering rewards for information." Isaiah's mouth went dry. "How do you know this?" "I have ears in the big house. The cook told me." Ruth's eyes were sharp despite her age. "Where are Mary and Lydia?" "Safe, I hope. By the river." Ruth nodded. "There's a trail through the north swamp. Not the main path where they'll look. Follow the broken cypress with the eagle's nest until you reach the split oak. Then head east toward the morning star." Isaiah stared at her. "Why are you helping me?" Ruth's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "I've buried 4 children on this land. No mother should lose her child to these chains." She pressed something into his hand, a small bundle of herbs tied with string, "for protection. Now pack what you need and go before the moon sets." After Ruth left, Isaiah gathered what little he could carry: a knife, flint for fire, the last coins from his hidden stash. He waited until the plantation fell silent except for the night insects and distant guard calls. Fireflies drifted through the darkness like earthbound stars as Isaiah slipped from his cabin for the last time. He clutched his small sack of blacksmith's tools, the only pieces of his craft he could carry. With each step away from the cabin, he felt the weight of his life there falling away. The woods beyond the cotton fields swallowed him into darkness. Isaiah paused at the tree line, looking back at the only home he'd known for 15 years. Somewhere in those fields lay the blood he'd spilled. Somewhere beyond lay Mary and Lydia. waiting for him. He turned and melted into the trees, each careful step taking him deeper into the unknown. Dawn painted the swamp in shades of gray and silver. Mist curled between cypress knees and floated above the dark water like restless ghosts. Isaiah trudged forward, each step sinking into the muck beneath the knee-deep water. His pants clung to his legs, heavy and cold. The night's journey had left him exhausted, his muscles aching from constant vigilance. Mosquitoes formed clouds around his head. He swatted weakly, too tired to care about the bites that peppered his neck and hands. The swamp smelled of rot and new life twisted together. Dead leaves decomposing while green shoots pushed through the water's surface. Isaiah paused to get his bearings. Old Ruth's directions echoed in his mind. Follow the broken cypress with the eagle's nest. He scanned the misty tree line until he spotted it. A massive cypress with its top sheared off, the remains of a great nest visible in its crown. Relief washed through him. He was on the right path. Please let them be safe, he whispered, a prayer carried away by the morning breeze. The thought of Mary and Lydia waiting for him was the only thing keeping his legs moving. The image of Joseph, sold and gone, stabbed at his heart with each step. The water gradually shallowed as he followed a barely visible path along higher ground. Somewhere behind him, the barren plantation was waking to another day of search parties and questions. Isaiah knew he couldn't outrun dogs forever. His only hope was to find his family and keep moving north. A movement ahead made him freeze. A figure emerged from behind a thick trunk, small, hunched, familiar. "You move too loud," old Ruth said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard you splashing from 50 yards back." Isaiah's shoulders sagged with momentary relief. "Ruth, what are you doing here?" She gestured for him to follow, leading him to a small rise where the ground stayed dry. A crude lean-to of branches provided some shelter from watching eyes. "I came to make sure you found the right way," she said, settling onto a fallen log. Despite her age, Ruth moved through the swamp with the confidence of someone born to it. Many a runner has died getting lost in these waters. "Mary? Lydia?" Isaiah asked, his voice urgent. Ruth nodded slowly. "They're safe for now. I helped them reach the old church near the river bend, the one burned during the uprising 10 years back. Abel got them there before sunrise yesterday." Isaiah closed his eyes briefly in gratitude. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Ruth warned, her weathered face grim. "Edmund's men are close behind. They've brought hounds from the Wilkerson place, mean creatures trained for hunting people. They picked up your scent from the cabin, but lost it in the river." Isaiah tensed. "How much time do I have?" "Not enough." Ruth pulled a bundle from her shawl, cornbread wrapped in cloth. "Eat. You'll need strength." As Isaiah ate the simple food, Ruth told him what had happened after he fled. Edmund had ordered every slave cabin searched at dawn. Finding Isaiah gone had confirmed his suspicions. "He gathered everyone in front of the big house," Ruth said. "Made a speech about loyalty and punishment. Said anyone helping you would suffer worse than you." Isaiah swallowed hard. "Why are you risking this, then?" Ruth's eyes, cloudy with age but still sharp, fixed on him. "I told you, no mother should lose her child to these chains." A distant sound, the faint baying of hounds, made them both stiffen. "They've found your trail faster than I expected," Ruth muttered. "You should go back," Isaiah said, "before they realize you're helping me." Ruth's laugh was bitter. "Too late for that. Edmund already suspects me." She described how Edmund had questioned her that morning in front of the other slaves, asking if she knew anything about Isaiah's disappearance. "I played the confused old woman," she said. "But he knew. He called me to the house later, private-like." Her voice dropped lower. "Offered me freedom papers if I'd tell him where you went. Said at my age, I deserved to die a free woman." Isaiah stared at her. What did you tell him? Nothing yet. Ruth's eyes wouldn't meet his. But Isaiah, I'm 73 years old. I've lived my whole life in chains. My children were sold away before they could walk. My husband died under the lash. Her hands trembled slightly. Freedom means different things when you're too old to run. Ruth, Isaiah said urgently, grabbing her hands, please, don't betray us. Mary and Lydia, they're all I have left. Ruth pulled her hands away. I'm not promising anything, but I'll give you until tomorrow. After that, she shrugged. We all do what we must to survive. She stood, pointing west. Follow the water to where 3 cypress grow from one root. Turn north there and keep the morning sun on your right. You'll reach the church by nightfall if you hurry. With that, she disappeared into the mist, leaving Isaiah with a terrible weight in his chest. Could he trust her? Did he have a choice? The hound calls grew louder. Isaiah gathered his meager belongings and pushed deeper into the swamp, moving as quickly as the treacherous ground allowed. The day passed in a blur of water, mud, and constant fear. Several times Isaiah had to submerge himself completely when voices drifted too close. By afternoon, the sky darkened with gathering clouds. Rain would help hide his scent, but make travel more difficult. As twilight descended, Isaiah finally spotted the burned remains of the church. Little more than stone foundations and a partial wall where the altar had been. The roof was long gone, but someone had created a shelter in one corner using fallen timbers and branches. Isaiah approached cautiously, listening for any sound that might mean danger. The silence terrified him until a child's faint cry broke it. A sound he would know anywhere. Lydia. Mary, he called softly, stepping into the ruins. A figure emerged from the makeshift shelter. Mary stood frozen for a moment, as if unable to believe her eyes. Then she rushed forward, nearly knocking him over as she threw herself into his arms. "Isaiah!" she whispered against his chest. "Oh, God! Isaiah!" They held each other in silence, words unnecessary between them. Isaiah breathed in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling Lydia's small arms wrap around his legs. "I thought," Mary began, her voice breaking. "I know," Isaiah said, holding them both tightly. "But we're together now." In the shelter, Abel nodded a greeting. The old fisherman had risked everything to help them, but his eyes held no regret. As darkness fell completely, they huddled together in the crude shelter. Outside, rain began to patter against leaves. Isaiah knew this peace was temporary, that by tomorrow the hounds might find them, that Ruth might betray them, that the long road to freedom stretched impossibly far ahead. But for now, with Mary's head on his shoulder and Lydia's small body curled against his side, Isaiah allowed himself one moment of fragile hope. Moonlight spilled through the broken windows of the old church, casting silver patches on the crumbled stone floor. In one corner, where a partial wall still stood, Isaiah and his family huddled around a tiny fire. They had pushed sticks and moss into the cracks to block the wind, creating a shelter within the ruins. The fire was barely larger than a man's hand, just enough to warm their fingers and cast a gentle glow on their faces. More would risk drawing attention. Abel had warned them that smoke travels far across water at night. Mary sat with Lydia curled in her lap, the child finally sleeping after hours of fearful questions. Isaiah watched their faces in the flickering light, memorizing every detail as if afraid they might vanish. "The patrollers?" Mary asked quietly, her voice barely audible above the crickets singing outside. "Close," Isaiah admitted. "Ruth says they have hounds from Wilkerson's place." Mary's hand tightened around Lydia's shoulder. Everyone knew Wilkerson's hounds, bred for hunting people, not game. "Can we trust Ruth?" Mary asked, her eyes searching his face. "She's been kind, but she's scared," Isaiah finished. He poked at the small fire with a stick. "Edmund offered her freedom papers to betray us. Abel, who had been silent, spoke from the shadows. "That old woman's been here longer than the trees. Seen 3 generations born in chains." His voice was rough from years of river air. "Don't blame her for wanting to die free." "What did she say?" Mary pressed. Isaiah sighed. "She gave us until tomorrow." After that, he didn't need to finish. Silence fell between them, broken only by Lydia's soft breathing and the occasional pop from the fire. Outside, an owl called across the swamp. "I know a way," Abel finally said. He shifted closer to the fire, his weathered face serious in the orange glow. "There's a barge moored 2 bends upriver. Cotton barge, bound for Memphis tomorrow." "Memphis?" Mary whispered, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in days. Abel nodded. "Captain's a man I've done business with. Not friendly to our kind, but greedy enough to look the other way for the right price." He tapped his pocket. "I've been saving coins for 20 years. Never thought I'd use them this way, but seems right." Isaiah stared at the old fisherman. "Why would you help us like this?" Abel's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "I was born free, boy, in Maryland. Kidnapped when I was 12 and sold down here. Been 50 years, but I still remember what freedom tasted like." He touched his throat. "Like cool water when you're burning with thirst." Isaiah reached for Mary's hand. "If we can reach Memphis, Union sympathizers there," Abel confirmed. "People who'll help you get farther north." For the first time since Joseph's sale, a genuine smile crossed Mary's face. "We could be free," she whispered. "Really free." "We could find Joseph," Isaiah added softly. Lydia stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about butterflies. Mary stroked her hair. "The barge leaves at first light," Abel said. "We need to be aboard before the crew arrives." Isaiah nodded. "Then we rest now. Save our strength." A comfortable silence settled over them. The horror of the past days, Samuel's death, their desperate escape, seemed to recede with the simple prospect of hope. Mary even laughed softly when Isaiah described hiding in the swamp water with only his nose above the surface. "Like a gator," she teased, her smile illuminating the dim shelter. "A very handsome gator," Isaiah replied with exaggerated dignity. Even Abel chuckled, the sound rusty as if long unused. Isaiah suddenly remembered something. He took Lydia's hand, gently waking her. "I want to teach you both something important," he said. "What is it, Papa?" Lydia asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "A song. A special one." Isaiah cleared his throat and began to hum softly, a melody that sounded like a familiar hymn, but with subtle differences. When he sang the words, they seemed ordinary, about rivers and stars and God's grace. "It's pretty," Lydia said. "It's more than pretty," Isaiah explained. "It's directions. Each verse tells you which way to go if we get separated." He pointed to the words about the drinking gourd, the Big Dipper, that showed the way north, the river that bends, the Ohio, the Great Road, the path to Canada. "Other runaways taught me this," he said. "Songs that sound like worship, but really help people find freedom." Mary's eyes shone with understanding. "Clever," she whispered. "They can't stop us from singing." They practiced together, voices blending in the darkness. Isaiah taught Lydia the hand motions that went with each verse, seemingly innocent gestures that reinforced the hidden message. For a precious hour, they were simply a family sharing music, the danger temporarily forgotten. Later, as Lydia drifted back to sleep, Isaiah and Mary spoke in whispers about their plans. They would need new names in Memphis. They would need to find work. Most importantly, they would need to search for Joseph. "We'll find him," Mary promised, squeezing Isaiah's hand. "God didn't bring us this far to abandon us now." Isaiah wasn't sure about God anymore, not after all he'd seen. But he believed in Mary's strength and his own determination. That would have to be enough. As the night deepened, Abel dozed against the wall, his breathing heavy. Lydia slept with her head in Mary's lap. Even Mary's eyes eventually closed. exhaustion claiming her at last. Isaiah watched over them, unable to sleep. Every sound from the swamp made him tense. Was it the wind in the cypress trees? Or men with dogs? Was that a splash from a fish jumping? Or someone wading through water? The hours crawled by. The fire died to embers. Through the empty window frame, Isaiah watched the moon slide across the sky, marking the approach of dawn. When the first hint of gray touched the eastern horizon, Isaiah carefully extracted himself from Mary's grasp. He needed to check the river before they moved, to make sure the current wasn't too strong, to scout the path to the barge. "I'll be right back," he whispered, though no one stirred. The air outside was cool and damp. Mist hovered above the ground, turning the world ghostly. Isaiah moved silently through the ruins, past the tumbled stones that had once been the church entrance. The river lay just beyond a stand of willows, its surface dark and smooth in the pre-dawn light. Isaiah stood at the bank, studying the flow. The spring rains had made it run high and fast, but not dangerously so. They could manage it. He was so focused on the water that he didn't sense the presence watching him from the shadows. Behind a massive cypress, barely 20 yards away, Ruth stood perfectly still. Her wrinkled face was wet, not with swamp water, but with tears that traced silent paths down her cheeks. In her pocket was Edmund's written promise of freedom papers. In her heart was the memory of every child she'd ever seen torn from their mother's arms. She watched Isaiah testing the water's edge, unaware of her presence. Her hand trembled as she touched the small whistle in her pocket, the signal she'd promised to give if she found the runaways. Morning came with a blanket of fog over the Yazoo River. It crept across the water like a living thing, thick fingers of mist reaching into the crumbling church, where Mary slept with Lydia curled against her. The small fire had died hours ago, leaving only ash and a lingering warmth between the stones. Mary's eyes fluttered open at the sound, distant at first, but unmistakable. Dogs barking. Not the lazy bark of farmhounds greeting the morning, but the excited yelping of animals on a scent. She sat up quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Isaiah," she whispered, reaching for him in the half-light. But his place beside her was empty and cold. Abel stirred in his corner, his old bones creaking as he pushed himself upright. "What's that noise?" "Dogs," Mary said, already shaking Lydia awake. "Where's Isaiah?" "Went to check the river before dawn," Abel said, grabbing his walking stick. "We need to move. Now." Lydia rubbed her eyes, confused by the sudden urgency. "Mama? What's happening?" "We need to find Papa and go to the boat," Mary explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "Remember the song he taught you? We might need it sooner than we thought." The barking grew louder, closer. Mary gathered their few belongings, a small bundle of clothes, a water gourd, the cornbread wrapped in cloth. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped everything. Outside, the fog swallowed the world beyond 20 paces. Trees appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The ground was spongy beneath their feet as they hurried toward the river path. "Isaiah!" Mary called in a harsh whisper. "Isaiah, where are you?" Then they saw him, running toward them through the mist, his face twisted with fear and urgency. Behind him, the dogs' voices rose to a frenzied pitch. "They've found us," he gasped, reaching for Lydia and lifting her into his arms. "Edmund and the patrols are coming through the woods. We have to reach the barge now." They ran, Abel hobbling as fast as his old legs could carry him, Mary clutching her bundle, Isaiah holding Lydia. The fog parted and closed around them like curtains. The barking grew louder with each step. "There!" Abel pointed toward a bend in the river where the mist thinned. "The barge is just past those willows." Hope surged through Mary's chest. 20 more steps. 15. 10. Then figures emerged from the fog, blocking their path. Edmund Barron stood at the center, flanked by 4 men with rifles. Behind them, two slave catchers held straining hounds on leather leashes. "Good morning, Isaiah," Edmund said, his voice calm and cold as the river. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Isaiah pushed Lydia toward Mary and stepped forward, placing himself between the guns and his family. "We don't belong to anyone," he said. Edmund's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The law disagrees." He gestured to his men, who spread out in a half-circle. "How did you find us?" Abel demanded. From behind a cypress tree, another figure appeared. Ruth, her eyes downcast, her shoulders slumped beneath her worn shawl. "Ruth," Mary whispered, disbelief and betrayal sharp in her voice. "How could you?" The old woman couldn't meet their eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "He promised me papers, freedom in my last years." "Freedom bought with our blood," Isaiah said, his voice hollow with understanding rather than anger. Edmund nodded to his men. "Take them." Everything happened too quickly after that. The patrollers rushed forward. Isaiah fought, managing to knock one man unconscious before two others wrestled him to the ground. Mary screamed and tried to run with Lydia, but a patroller caught her by the hair and dragged them back. Abel swung his walking stick, catching a slave catcher across the face. For a moment, the old fisherman stood tall and defiant, a glimpse of the free man he'd once been. "You'll pay for that, old man," Edmund said coldly. They were bound with rope, wrists tied tight behind their backs, and marched through the swamp toward the plantation. The dogs pranced around them, tongues lolling, excited by the chase and capture. Ruth followed at a distance, a shadow of guilt and shame. By mid-morning, they reached the clearing where the slave cabin stood. Edmund ordered all the enslaved people gathered to witness what would follow. "Let this be a lesson," he announced, standing tall in his fine coat despite the heat. "There is no escape from justice." He turned to Abel first. "This man assisted in the escape of my property and assaulted my men. The penalty is death." Mary gasped. Lydia buried her face against her mother's skirts. Two overseers dragged Abel to the whipping post. The old man didn't beg or struggle. He stood straight, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the fields. "Any last words, River Rat?" Edmund asked. Abel looked directly at Isaiah. "Remember, the current always flows one way. Follow it home." The first blow from the overseer's club cracked against Abel's skull. Blood sprayed across the packed dirt. The second blow sent him to his knees. By the third, his eyes had gone still and empty. Isaiah lunged against his bonds but couldn't break free. "You didn't have to kill him," he shouted, his voice raw with grief and rage. Edmund stepped closer to Isaiah. "His death was mercy compared to what awaits you." He addressed the gathered slaves again. "This man murdered my brother. At sundown, he will hang from this same post as an example of what happens to those who forget their place." Mary sobbed, clutching Lydia against her. "Please," she begged. "He was only protecting us." "Take her and the child to the wagon," Edmund ordered. "They'll watch his punishment, then be sold downriver." Isaiah was chained to a post near the barn as preparations for his execution began. An overseer hammered together a crude platform beneath the whipping post, while another prepared the rope. Hours passed under the merciless sun. Isaiah watched as Mary and Lydia were locked in a covered wagon nearby, their cries cutting him deeper than any lash ever had. When they were allowed a final moment together, Isaiah pressed his forehead against the wagon slats to be closer to them. "Don't cry," he whispered, though tears tracked through the dust on his own face. "Freedom's already begun in you. Remember the song. Remember the way north." "I can't do this without you," Mary sobbed, reaching through the slats to touch his fingers. "You're stronger than you know," he told her. "Find Joseph. Tell our children about me." The sun began its descent, painting the western sky in bands of crimson and gold. Edmund ordered Isaiah brought to the execution platform. Slaves were arranged in rows to witness the hanging. their faces masks of sorrow and fear. The rope, rough and thick, scraped against Isaiah's neck as they fitted the noose. He stood on the platform, looking out over the fields where he had spent his life in bondage. Beyond them, the river glinted in the dying light, the river that had promised freedom just hours before. Edmund climbed the steps to stand beside him, a Bible in hand, though he opened it to no particular page. "Let all bear witness," he began, his voice carrying across the yard. "This is the price of defiance. This is the law of God and man." As Edmund continued his speech about order and obedience, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Isaiah looked up, wondering if rain would be the last thing he felt on his skin. But it wasn't thunder. From the direction of the cotton fields came shouts and the unmistakable crackle of fire. Smoke rose in a thick column, black against the sunset sky. The barn was burning. Flames licked the night sky, turning darkness to angry orange light. The barn's wooden beams cracked and groaned, like living things dying in agony. Sparks flew upward, carried by the hot wind, landing on dry cotton and hay. "Water! Get water!" Edmund screamed, his face twisted with rage and panic. "Form a line to the well." But the ordered world he commanded was collapsing. Some slaves ran toward the fire with buckets, others away from it, seizing their moment of freedom in the chaos. The overseer cracked his whip, but in the roaring confusion, its snap was just another sound lost to the inferno. Isaiah stood on the hanging platform, the noose still around his neck, watching as the flames spread with unnatural speed from the barn toward the cotton storehouse. The fire danced with purpose, as though guided by unseen hands. Edmund grabbed Isaiah's shirt. "Did you plan this? Who helped you?" Before Isaiah could answer, a thunderous crack split the air. The burning support beam above the platform, the one from which Isaiah was to hang, snapped and came crashing down in a shower of embers. Edmund leapt back, but Isaiah, still tied to the post, couldn't move. The beam struck the platform, splintering the wood beneath his feet. Isaiah felt the rope jerk tight for one terrifying instant, then snap from the strain. He tumbled through the broken platform onto the ground, coughing and gasping. Across the yard, Mary and Lydia pressed their faces against the slats of the wagon, crying out to him. Two overseers stood guard, their attention torn between their prisoners and the spreading flames. Then a shadow moved behind the wagon, a large figure creeping through the smoke. Jonas, the stable hand with the scar across his cheek, crouched low, a ring of keys in his hand. The keys Edmund had taken from the overseer and hung on his belt earlier that day. Jonas worked quickly, unlocking the wagon door while the guards were distracted by falling debris from the storehouse roof. Mary pushed Lydia out first, then followed, keeping low in the billowing smoke. Isaiah struggled to his feet, his hands still bound behind his back. Through watering eyes, he saw Tom Briggs, the overseer, running toward him with a pistol raised. "Don't move, boy!" Briggs shouted over the roar of the fire. Isaiah stood frozen, waiting until Briggs was just feet away. Then he dropped and rolled sideways as a burning timber crashed down where he'd been standing. The timber struck Briggs, pinning him to the ground in a spray of sparks. The overseer screamed, his clothes catching fire. "Help me!" Briggs cried out, thrashing beneath the beam. Isaiah hesitated for only a moment. Then he turned and ran, still bound, toward his family. Jonas met him halfway, grabbing him by the shoulders and spinning him around to cut the ropes with a small knife. "You took your time," Isaiah gasped, flexing his bloodied wrists. "Had to make it look good," Jonas replied, nodding toward the barn. "Didn't expect it to spread so fast, though." Mary threw her arms around Isaiah, sobbing with relief. "I thought we'd lost you." "Not yet," Isaiah said, picking up Lydia, who clung to his neck. "We need to move before they regroup." All around them, the plantation had descended into madness. Several slaves fought the fire, while others took advantage of the chaos to slip away into the darkness. Edmund Barron stood in the middle of it all, shouting contradictory orders that no one followed. "This way," Jonas urged, leading them toward the tree line beyond the slave quarters. "I've got horses waiting." They ran, ducking low through the smoke, past burning outbuildings and panicked animals. Behind them, Edmund's voice rose above the din. "Stop them! $500 to any man who brings Isaiah back alive." At the edge of the plantation, 2 horses waited, tethered to a fallen tree. Jonas boosted Mary and Lydia onto the first horse. "You know the way to the big cypress?" he asked Mary. She nodded, gripping the reins. "Abel showed me before—" Her voice broke. "Old Cicely is waiting there," Jonas explained. "She'll get you to the river crossing where the Union patrols can't touch you." Isaiah mounted the second horse, then reached down to pull Jonas up behind him. But Jonas shook his head. "I got more work to do here," he said, his eyes reflecting the flames consuming the plantation. "Others need help getting out." "It's too dangerous," Isaiah protested. "Edmund will kill anyone he catches. Then he'll have to catch me first." Jonas grinned, the scar on his cheek twisting with his smile. "Go on now. I'll find you when it's done." They rode hard through the woods, following game trails known only to those who'd spent lifetimes studying every escape route from bondage. The horses' hooves thundered over soft earth, branches whipping past their faces in the darkness. Behind them, the night sky glowed red. The big house had caught fire now, its fine white columns silhouetted against the flames. After an hour of hard riding, they reached the edge of the great swamp. The horses couldn't go further, their hooves sinking into the boggy ground. They dismounted, slapping the animals' rumps to send them running back the way they'd come. False trails for the dogs to follow. Isaiah took Lydia in his arms again, and they waded into the dark water. Cypress knees rose around them like the bony fingers of giants. Insects hummed and frogs croaked, undisturbed by the human drama unfolding in their realm. The water rose to their waists, then receded as they found higher ground. Isaiah's breath came in ragged gasps. The smoke had filled his lungs, and now each breath burned like fire in his chest. At the base of a massive cypress, its trunk wider than 3 men with arms outstretched, Isaiah stumbled and fell to his knees. Lydia slipped from his arms onto the mossy ground. "We need to rest," Mary said, kneeling beside him. "No," Isaiah wheezed, struggling to stand. "They'll have dogs on our trail by morning. We need to reach the river before first light." Mary pressed a hand to his forehead. "You're burning up." "The smoke." "I'll be fine," he insisted, though each word was an effort. He looked back the way they had come. Through gaps in the trees, the red glow of the burning plantation pulsed like an angry heart. "We need to keep moving," Mary urged, helping him to his feet. "Jonas said Cicely would take us to the crossing." Isaiah shook his head. "You and Lydia go. Follow the water like Abel taught you. Head northeast." "What?" "No!" Mary clutched his arm. "We stay together." "There's one chain left to break," Isaiah said, taking her hand and placing it over her heart. "As long as Edmund lives, he'll hunt us, hunt our children. Then we'll run farther," Mary pleaded. "Canada, the Free States, and live always looking over our shoulder?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, this ends tonight." He cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail by moonlight. The curve of her cheek, the strength in her eyes that had carried her through years of bondage. "Take Lydia to the river," he said softly. "Find Joseph. Tell our children I died free." He kissed her deeply, tasting salt from both their tears. Then he bent and kissed Lydia's forehead as she clung to his legs, not understanding but feeling the weight of the moment. "Papa, don't go," she whispered. "I have to," he said, gently detaching her small hands. But remember the song I taught you. It will lead you home when I can't." Mary stood straight, gathering her strength. "How will I know if you succeed?" "You'll know," Isaiah said, touching her cheek one last time. "The chains will be broken. All of them." He turned and limped back toward the burning plantation, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. Behind him, the swamp whispered with ancient secrets, bearing witness to one man's final stand for freedom. The midnight sky bled orange and red as the plantation burned. Smoke rolled across the fields like an angry fog, turning the familiar landscape into a hellscape of shadows and flame. Isaiah limped through this burning world, one hand pressed to his side where a broken rib stabbed with each breath. He had circled wide through the swamp, coming back to the plantation from the north where the slave quarters once stood. Now they were just skeletal remains, their wooden frames glowing like the ribs of some giant beast. The air tasted of ash and freedom, bitter and sweet at once. Isaiah paused at the edge of the clearing, watching figures dash through the smoke. House slaves carried armfuls of silver and paintings from the big house, seizing their chance to claim small fortunes from the chaos. Overseers shouted useless orders, their authority evaporating like morning dew in the heat of this new reality. And there, moving through it all with deadly purpose, was Edmund Barron. His fine coat was gone, his white shirt smeared with soot. He carried a pistol in one hand, a lantern in the other, and his face was twisted with rage. Every few steps, he would grab someone, shout a question, then push them aside when they couldn't answer. "Where is he?" Edmund's voice carried over the roar of the flames. "Where is the blacksmith?" Isaiah crouched lower, watching. Edmund was heading toward the big house, the grand white mansion now outlined in flickering orange. Parts of the roof had already collapsed, but the sturdy first floor and cellar still stood. That cellar, Isaiah knew it well. Every slave on Barren Plantation knew it. Samuel had used it for discipline, a cold stone chamber where chains hung from the walls and beams, where the ledger books recording every stroke of the lash were kept in a locked cabinet. Isaiah moved like a shadow, staying low, using the smoke as cover. The pain in his side sharpened with each step, but he pushed it away. His mind was clear now, clearer than it had ever been. Edmund disappeared into the side entrance of the big house, the one that led directly to the cellar. Isaiah waited 30 heartbeats, then followed. The heat was intense as he approached the burning mansion. Windows had shattered from the temperature, and flames licked out like hungry tongues. The side door hung open, revealing stone steps leading down into darkness. Isaiah paused at the entrance, listening. Below, a lantern moved in the gloom. Edmund's voice echoed up the stairs. "Salvage the ledgers, at least. Family records, property deeds." Isaiah took a deep breath and descended. Each step sent pain shooting through his body, but he moved silently, the skills of a lifetime serving him now. At the bottom of the stairs, he pressed himself against the wall. The cellar was large, divided by stone arches into chambers. It smelled of damp earth, old pain, and now smoke that seeped through the floorboards above. Edmund stood at the far end, his back to the stairs, rifling through a cabinet. The ledgers, those books that recorded the ownership and punishment of human beings, were being stuffed into a satchel. "Looking for something?" Isaiah's voice was steady despite his pain. Edmund whirled, raising his pistol in one fluid motion. His eyes widened, then narrowed. You did this. All of this." Isaiah took a step forward. "I struck one blow. The rest—" He gestured upward, where the ceiling creaked ominously. That was years of hatred coming due. Edmund's finger tightened on the trigger. "Where is my property? Where are the others?" "Free," Isaiah said simply. "Beyond your reach." Edmund fired. The shot echoed in the stone chamber. Isaiah felt the bullet tear through his left shoulder, spinning him against the wall. He slid down, leaving a smear of blood on the stone. "You'll die here," Edmund said, advancing slowly, reloading the pistol with practiced hands. "But first, you'll tell me where they've gone." Isaiah struggled to his feet, blood running hot down his arm. "We're both dying here," he said. "The difference is, I made my peace with it." Edmund laughed, a cold sound that bounced off the stone walls. "Always the philosopher. My brother should have broken you years ago." "He tried," Isaiah said, watching Edmund's every move. "So many tried." Edmund stepped closer, pistol leveled at Isaiah's chest. "Last chance. Tell me where they've gone, and I'll make it quick." Isaiah lunged suddenly, not away, but toward Edmund. Surprised, Edmund fired again, but the bullet went wide as Isaiah crashed into him. They fell together, grappling on the stone floor, rolling toward the far wall where the chains hung. Despite his wounds, Isaiah fought with the strength of desperation. Edmund was younger, unwounded, but unused to physical struggle. They crashed against the cabinet, sending the ledgers scattering. Edmund slammed the pistol against Isaiah's wounded shoulder, making him cry out in agony. "Submit!" Edmund shouted, his cultured facade cracking to reveal the same cruelty his brother had shown more openly. "Submit! Damn you!" Isaiah's hand closed around cold iron, one of the chains used to secure slaves for whipping. With a roar that came from generations of pain, he swung it, catching Edmund across the face. The plantation owner fell back, blood streaming from a gash on his cheek. Before Edmund could recover, Isaiah was on him, wrapping the chain around his throat, then his wrists. With brutal efficiency, he secured Edmund to the heavy wooden beam at the center of the room, the same beam where Isaiah himself had once been lashed until his back was in ribbons. "What are you doing?" Edmund gasped, struggling against the chains. "You can't leave me here." Isaiah stood, swaying with weakness, blood dripping from his fingers onto the stone floor. "This place was built on chains," he said quietly. "It seems right you should wear them at the end." Above them, the ceiling gave a terrifying groan. Flaming debris fell through widening cracks. The mansion was collapsing. "You'll die too if you don't help me," Edmund said, his voice rising with panic. "Be reasonable." Isaiah limped to where Edmund's lantern had fallen. The oil had spilled, creating a spreading pool across the floor, inching toward the scattered ledgers. "We passed reason long ago," Isaiah said. He picked up the lantern, its flame still burning weakly. "What do you want?" Edmund shouted, truly afraid now. "Money? Freedom papers? I can give you anything." Isaiah looked at him with eyes that reflected the growing flames. "You never understood. We were never yours to give or take." He tipped the lantern onto the floor. The spilled oil caught immediately, flames racing across the stone toward the ledgers and the wooden beam. "Now you answer to the same silence we did," Isaiah said softly. Edmund screamed curses and threats that quickly turned to pleas as the fire spread. Isaiah turned away, climbing the stairs with the last of his strength, as smoke filled the cellar behind him. Outside, the night air hit his lungs like a blessing despite the smoke. The big house was fully engulfed now, its proud columns crumbling one by one. Isaiah stumbled across the yard, past the ruins of his forge where he had dreamed of freedom while shaping metal to his master's will. He reached the great oak tree where he had once watched Samuel Barron hang a man for the crime of teaching a child to read. Its lower branches were burning, leaves curling and falling like fiery rain. Isaiah's legs gave way. He collapsed beneath the burning oak, his blood soaking into the soil that had absorbed so much blood before. Behind him, the big house gave a final, thunderous groan as its structure failed completely, sending a fountain of sparks into the night sky. The reflection of flames danced in Isaiah's eyes as he watched the symbol of his captivity crumble. Pain washed through him in waves, but a strange peace came with it. Mary and Lydia were safe. Joseph would be found. The chains were broken. The morning light crept across the Mississippi, turning the water from black to muddy brown. Mary Carter sat at the edge of Abel's barge, her children huddled against her. Joseph's eyes were red from crying, but dry now. Lydia slept against her brother's shoulder, her small face peaceful in exhaustion. Behind them, a column of black smoke still rose from what had been barren plantation. The smoke seemed to mark their path, following them downriver like a dark finger pointing the way to freedom. Jonas stood at the crude rudder, guiding the flat-bottomed barge around sandbars and through gentle currents. His face was grim, but his eyes held a fierce light. "We're making good time," he said softly to Mary. "Should reach the Union lines by midday if the current holds." Mary nodded, but said nothing. Since they'd fled in the night, she had barely spoken. Her eyes kept turning back to the smoke rising behind them. Joseph broke the silence. "Mama, is Papa coming after us?" The question hung in the air. Mary pulled her son closer, pressing her lips to the top of his head. "Your Papa made sure we got away," she finally said. "He bought our freedom with everything he had." Jonas looked away, blinking hard. He had seen the wound in Isaiah's side, had known what it meant when Isaiah turned back toward the burning plantation, but he kept this knowledge to himself. The barge drifted around a bend, and the smoke from barren plantation finally disappeared from view. Mary took a deep breath, as if a weight had lifted from her chest. "There!" Jonas pointed ahead where the river widened. "Union Camp." Blue uniforms moved along the shoreline. A small dock jutted into the river, and above it, an American flag flapped in the morning breeze. 3 soldiers with rifles watched their approach. "Don't speak unless spoken to," Mary instructed the children. "Let me do the talking." Jonas steered the barge toward the dock. One of the soldiers called out, "Identify yourselves!" "Refugees from barren plantation," Mary called back, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Seeking shelter." The soldiers helped secure the barge. One of them, a young man with kind eyes beneath his blue cap, offered Mary his hand to step onto the dock. "I'm Lieutenant Miller. We've had others coming upriver these past weeks. The fighting's moved south, but you'll be safe here." They were led to a cluster of tents where other black families huddled. Some recently escaped, others who had been free for months. A woman in a simple dress approached them, not a soldier, but clearly working with them. "I'm Sarah Wilkins, with the Freedmen's Aid Society," she said, taking in their exhausted faces and tattered clothing. "Let's get you some food and dry clothes." They sat around a small fire, eating bowls of bean soup, the first hot meal they'd had since fleeing. Lieutenant Miller approached with a leather-bound ledger. "I need to record your names," he explained, "for the Registry of Contraband and Freed Persons." Mary stiffened at the word contraband. Property. Still property, even here. "Carter," she said firmly. "Mary Carter. These are my children, Joseph and Lydia." The lieutenant nodded, writing carefully. "And your husband's name?" Mary straightened her back, looked directly into the young officer's eyes. "Isaiah Carter," she said, her voice clear and proud. "Free man." The lieutenant paused, then wrote the name. Perhaps he noticed how she said it. Not "my husband," but "free man," as if conferring a title Isaiah had earned. "Where is he now?" the lieutenant asked gently. Mary looked toward the south, where the smoke was no longer visible. "He gave us our freedom," she said simply, "and stayed behind to make sure we kept it." The lieutenant seemed to understand what she wasn't saying. He closed his ledger with a nod. "You're under the protection of the United States Army now, Mrs. Carter," he said. "No one will take you or your children back to bondage." That night, lying on a borrowed blanket beneath the stars, Mary finally allowed herself to weep, not from fear or desperation, but from the terrible mixture of freedom gained and love lost. The oak tree stood alone in the field of new growth, its trunk blackened but still alive. Around it, Nature had begun to reclaim barren plantation. Wild grasses growing through the charred foundations, vines creeping over tumbled stones. Joseph Carter, 22 years old now, tall and strong like his father, walked slowly across what had once been the main yard. Beside him, Lydia, 19, carried wildflowers gathered along the road. It was 1870, and the war had been over for 5 years. Emancipation had come. The Carters had made a life in Memphis. Mary working as a cook, Joseph apprenticing with a blacksmith, Lydia learning to read and write at a Freedmen's Bureau school. But today, they had returned to where it began. "There," Joseph said, pointing to the massive oak. "That's where Papa used to meet us sometimes, when Master Samuel was away." Lydia nodded, though her memories of this place were faint and dreamlike. She remembered fear and running, and her mother's arms carrying her through darkness. But she also remembered her father's voice, singing low as he worked at his forge. They approached the oak in silence. Its upper branches had sprouted new leaves, green against the scarred bark. At its base, where the roots pushed up through the soil, Joseph knelt and removed a small knife from his pocket. "What are you doing?" Lydia asked, placing her wildflowers at the base of the tree. "Something I promised myself," Joseph replied. He began to carve into the bark, working slowly and carefully. Lydia watched as letters appeared. Isaiah Carter. "Mama says we shouldn't look back," she said softly, "that the past is pain." Joseph nodded, continuing his work. "But if we don't mark it, who will remember? Who will know what happened here?" When he finished, he traced the letters with his fingertip, feeling the rough edges of his father's name carved into living wood. "The white folks in town," Joseph said. "When they talk about what happened here, they call him a murderer, a rebel. They say he burned the plantation out of wickedness." Lydia placed her hand over his on the carved name. "We know different." Joseph stood, stepping back to look at his handiwork. The letters would grow with the tree, stretching and expanding as the oak continued its slow recovery. "They called him a killer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But to us, he was the man who gave us life." Lydia slipped her arm through her brother's. "Twice over," she added. "Once when we were born, and again when he set us free." A breeze stirred the new leaves overhead, sending dappled sunlight dancing across the carved name. It moved through the ash saplings that had sprung up around the ruins, creating a sound like a long, peaceful sigh. Joseph closed his eyes, feeling the warm air against his face. For a moment, it was almost like feeling his father's hand on his cheek, the way Isaiah would touch him when proud of something he'd done. "Mama wanted to come," Lydia said, "but it was too hard for her." Joseph nodded. "She carries him with her every day." "We all do." They stood together a while longer as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Birds called from the trees that bordered the old fields. Nature was reclaiming what had once been bought and sold, erasing the artificial boundaries of ownership. "Time to go," Joseph finally said. "We promised we'd be back by nightfall." As they turned to leave, Lydia paused for one last look at the name carved into the tree. "Do you think he knew?" she asked. "That morning when he sent us away. Do you think he knew he wouldn't follow?" Joseph considered this, remembering his father's face in those final moments, determined, clear-eyed, full of purpose. "I think," he said slowly, "that he knew exactly what freedom would cost, and he paid it willingly." They walked away from the oak tree, following the old road that led back to the river. Behind them, the carved name caught the last rays of sunlight, standing out stark and permanent against the healing bark. Isaiah Carter. A name, not a possession. A father, not a slave. A man who had forged his own freedom in fire. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.